So good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Bartlett. Thanks for reading the newsletter. We're going to be talking a little bit about the newsletter. I wanted to start to create something where we could actually chat about it and talk about rather than just reading, and go through a couple of the topics there that might be of interest or just things to look out for. The newsletter is kind of designed to support you. It's there to help you. There's a lot of things in there that you might not use or you'll come across, and it tends to be in anything in international trade. It's when you actually hit a stumbling block is when you start needing that support. But the newsletter's there, and there's lots of information in there to protect you, to get you prepared. It's very volatile. We've seen in the last few years, I've been in trade far too long and definitely feeling my age these days with the snow outside. It's volatile. Supply chain is more volatile. It's probably been always volatile, but it's probably more in the news now when it's, when anything's in social media, when anything's on the news. You tend to find that lots and lots of things start to come out of the water, but it's always been there. There's nothing really changed. So I would say to anybody who's looking at trading or trading at the moment, I won't get too concerned that there's a whole change. It's just you've got to be aware. You've got to be aware of the markets you're delivering into. Are things changing? Yes, we have geopolitics. We can't control that. As an exporter and importer, you can't control the markets. You can't control your buyer or your seller or however it's working. But what you can do is mitigate the issues that you could face, particularly when you think of the US. Lots of people went into the US and, have always shipped into the US with no real care. You shipped into the US, it worked. You worked the freight forwarders and the carriers who did a great job delivering your goods. And then all of a sudden, obviously, Trump administration comes in, he doesn't like things and he starts to change things. All of a sudden, it creates a whirlwind and an avalanche of issues which shouldn't be there. You should be in control of that. It's all about you being in control, and that's the whole point of the newsletters is saying, you know what, things do happen, unfortunately, things do change, but as long as you're in control of that, you can start to mitigate. We knew he was going to put tariffs up. There was no question he was going to look at tariffs. It's a great way of generating income. He thinks completely different, whether you like him, hate him, or whatever you do, because I'm not into politics. But the reasons why they do that, and it's just understanding that and making sure you're aware. But some of the things I looked at, which I'll share the screen now on today's newsletter, I thought if I start to go through with you, it's probably a little bit easier to understand. Obviously, global markets remains cautious, as we know, so it is cautious. We're seeing, compliance and all the risk elements around there. It's just to really think about it and make sure you're fully aware of the situations around you. If you're exporting, you've got a product, check your commodity code. Your commodity code, if you're not quite sure, if you're quite new to international trade, your commodity code plays an important role, and certainly your origin. Now, just to give you a background of myself, obviously, the experience, obviously, I do audits. Unfortunately, before HMRC probably coming in is the best time, but obviously, normally it can happen afterwards. HMRC are just looking for good compliance. They're not there to fine you, to charge you. Yes, obviously, they're there to do a job. But as long as you're meeting all your compliance in your areas, you should be okay. And your commodity code plays an important role in that. What is a commodity code? Commodity code is the description of your products, and it's an 8-digit. Well, it comes 6 digits. Let's be clear here. Your first 6 digits under the harmonized system, which what that means, it's worldwide. So that means everybody around the world has the same 6 digits. The digits that change then are normally country specific. Your 8 digits for the UK, your 10 digits for the UK. That doesn't necessarily mean them 10 digits that people always use when they're exporting. I have no idea why people do this. And you shouldn't be forced to use 10 digits. Your 8 digits leaving the UK. When that arrives into another country, they will have their own set of rules. Their 10 digits or the last 2 digits could be slightly different to your 2 digits, or they could be under your 10 digits that you assume it is, could have a lot of restrictions. And that's why your goods get stuck. Your freight forwarder does not, for the sake of it, just hold your goods. Your freight forwarder wants to deliver. Look, I've been freight forwarding for over 20 years. You want to get them goods and you want to deliver them. That's how you make your money. It's quick, it's 100 mile an hour. There's so much small margin of profit in a freight forwarder. You can't afford to be stuck at a border yourself. You can't afford to be stuck at a warehouse. You've got to deliver them goods. So there's no reason at all why even a carrier or freight forwarder holds your goods. It only holds your goods because customs have said there's an issue with it. So your 8 digits is really important to think about. And that's why we see the volatility when I see and when I do our customs on. That's why I created the simplified supply chain and customs diagnostics. It allows you to understand where your pitfalls are, and that's so important. Again, some breaking news. I noticed Financial Times tend to do quite a lot on breaking news. The problem with Financial Times, which is great, is that unless you register, you don't get much information, but you can scour that information. That's what I'm doing at the moment. So I find the information, but to try and show you, it's very difficult because you always have to register. But there is a lot of disruption. Just think of your controls. I mean, we've got this madness at the moment with the UK, the EU, start all these geopolitical things, Ukraine, obviously, Russia, Israel, all these things that we can't control. But what that does, it puts huge pressure on you as an exporter or an importer because it adds a layer of compliance or complexity within there. That's the issue. So these are the things you have to be thinking about. Don't just assume what you did last year is the same this year. You've got to always be maintaining. I know that's difficult because ultimately, if you're like me, you're a salesperson. Obviously, I'm in compliance and I look after compliance and I do audits and make sure get people ready, to export or import. But actually, I'm a salesman and I want to get sales. And I understand that's where you want to get. But please, you've got to understand that compliance. So you see, I mean, we've created a whole avalanche of experts now on LinkedIn. See it every day, do this, do that. Don't be frightened what they're saying because the reality is that, some of them do a great job, but there's a lot in there who won't have a clue. Ultimately, you just want to make sure that you're doing everything you should be doing. Your commercial invoice, your packing list, who's doing your customs, who's doing your Incoterms. All these key things will keep you in control of your journey. That's all I'll say. I'm certainly not here to fight them. I'm actually here to make it easy for you. I dug out a couple of things just to show you, which I thought was interesting. I was seeing this earlier. I was rooting through some things about audits and what happens in a customs audit, etc. Well, unless you've actually had a customs audit, you'll know what happens. What we're seeing at the moment, so again, don't be too frightened by a lot of these things, is generally you'll get a phone call or an email from HMRC to say to you that, we want to come and do some checks. And what they're doing initially is to come and check your paperwork and make sure you're doing, what your systems are in place. Now, the majority of people, and the reality is, don't have SOPs or procedures in place. That's your downfall. Please, whatever you do, make sure you got procedures. Make sure you're making sure you're keeping all your documents and everything else. That's the first initial. They'll come in and check. If they've seen something that they're not quite happy with through the MSS report, everybody gets to know it's sitting on your portal, your government portal. If you're an importer, everything now is sitting on there from the HMRC. You have to control that. If you've never logged on, you should log on because you need to control, especially if you're doing the spawn VAT and other things. And as an exporter, they're looking at your procedure and your processes. And then they're looking at your supply chain. If you're an exporter or manufacturer, you must be getting some goods from somewhere. And if you're getting it from Harry Ramp Corner, how do you know the origin that Harry's give you is the origin that you may be having if you're using a UK origin? So these are the key things they're looking at. They're looking at origins, commodity codes, procedures, paperwork. They want to make sure that you're doing things correct. If they don't see you doing things quite correct, that could then entail, a much longer visit, which you don't want. But in most cases, they're checking to make sure you're doing it because obviously HMRC are here to generate income and they're here to make sure that you're doing things what you should be doing. So, always see HMRC as just an added layer of compliance. That's all they are. Don't be put off with it because if you're doing things correctly, you should be doing it okay. So again, I just dug that out just to give you an idea. Global trade outlooks, ones to watch. I was looking at this and I read a lot of different things. Current global landscape is rife for complexity. Again, don't be put off with it. Geopolitical, yeah, you can't control that. I wish we could, but we can't. I haven't got a crystal ball that can tell you everything that can happen. It's not going. I have no idea. So again, just be aware of that. Data is telling us. I got very heavily involved with data. If anybody knows me, they know I'm a bit data obsessed. I'm working in AI for a long time. I'm not new to AI. I've been in it for over 5 years now in California. I started to look at data and look at what data is telling us, and that's why we created the trade intelligence. It's not quite ready yet. There's a few things ready on there, but when it's ready, wow, what it can do is incredible. You can actually put a commodity code in there and check a market, and it will give you all that information. If you're in AI, don't always think that it happens straight away. There's a lot of work. I've spent 11 months on this project, on this trade intelligence project, on the customer supply chain diagnostics that we created that's now live. That took 4 years in the making Now, great if somebody can do that, but trust me, you get somebody who's in AI and you try telling them about trade, do you understand trade, and ask them to do something within the trade parameters. You know, it's like with where with the fairies of trying to be polite than we were saying, because they don't understand what you're doing. Same with anything in marketing when it's international trade. It's very hard for them to, because if they don't understand what you're trying to achieve, how can they market your products? So again, it's very important to understand these when people talk about this is what it's telling us. Data tells me a lot of things, and this is why I've started to put it on there. Data is telling me that there is volatility within the market, but there's also a lot of opportunities. The problem you find, and one of the things that I love about what one of the major banks have done in the UK, where they've looked at this over, and I've been involved in this. They looked at it, and they wanted to make it an easier process for people to be able to export. For me, the hardest part of the export journey is that first steps. You research, your strategy. That's the hardest part because most people have a product you can export. The issue you have is how do you get to that? So somebody said to me, well, if you get AI, you're going to replace your human. No, people really misunderstand AI in trade. They really do. And if anybody tells you any different, they're not quite telling you the truth. What AI does, it gives you the speed and the quickness that I can't talk 1,000 miles an hour. I can help you, but I can't talk and I can't talk to 20 people at the time. What AI does, it creates all my intelligence and all my data that I've been working on in the last probably 4 years, and it starts to understand what I'm trying to do for my clients or for consumers out there. And what it did and what I built was a data process that allows you to do what you need to do. What is my key market I want to export to? Put your information there. It gives you the 3 markets or 1 market, which depending on what you want to do, gives you a full report on that. So it gives you a full presentation, not just the market, the volatility, the customs, the documentation. It gives you everything. It gives you a whole profile. From that, that's where then you use your country expert. You use that expert in that market who then will help you because you've already done the really messy stuff that people get really frustrated, and that's why they don't tend to take it further. It's a real misinformation. I've been doing this a long time, so I know how it works, and I know all this money is pumped into a lot of these platforms and everything else, or hubs and other things. But it fails at that first point because somebody comes in and says, "Yeah, I can do that market for you," but how do you know that market's right for you? The data tells us the data's all there. I've got all the data. The data is telling you exactly where your market is. Check it, make it work for you. Then invest in the person in that country then to get you, or find a distributor or find an agent in that country because you know there's a market there. Don't waste your energy. That's the problem. You spend 6, 8 months and then you get fed up, or your CEO gets fed up because he's invested thousands and thousands of pounds with somebody who's trying to, help you. But if you haven't done that research and strategy, this does that part for you. So it's very important to understand. Again, accelerated geopolitics, we know there's regularity. I mean, we know that there's issues. We know, but Japan's not going to, China, Japan, all the countries you're dealing with aren't going to switch off trading with you tomorrow. So don't let anybody kind of fight you. They still are going to allow you to trade. You just have to check your processes. Don't assume your freight forwarders normally are way ahead of the game because if they've got agents in them countries, the country specific in the countries they're in, think of DHL, think of all your big boys, Samarco. They'll have agents already who will be telling them the things to watch out for. So as long as you've got that dialogue with your freight forwarder, ask the questions. They'll be able to tell you, look, unfortunately, now we need a conformity report, or now we need a document to go with that because I can't process that customs in the country to allow it to go through the border. So these are just the things to think about. So yes, there's volatility. China ain't going to stop trading with the UK tomorrow. They're going to carry on trading, and it's become more and more difficult as you've seen with the closure things, and now we're going through the Land of Good Hope and other areas. There's always a way, and that increases your cost in freight. I would say my many years of working in Europe and other countries is that normally you've got a lot of stability in them rates. The stability you don't have is the rising costs for this fuel and other things that you can't control. But normally, if you've got working with a good freight forwarder who has a good agent, normally them rates and everything are normally set within a barometer as long as it doesn't increase by like 5-10%, then there'll be some increases. It's the fuel and everything else around there that ends up being costly. Why customs, why a customs declaration goes up in cost is beyond me. Because a customs declaration, the same person's doing it, was doing it last year, is doing it this year. So then there are key things that shouldn't really increase. They could increase in the UK's collection because obviously there's more cost going up with all the taxes now within the UK. So you might see, so that's where the volatility is when we're looking at cost. Yes, there's markets in India and China, but the UK have just done some trade deals. So India is going to be a prominent area for us. Is India going to stop trading with the UK? Is it not? Not at all. So again, don't be put off. Understand the news, what's there, and that's why I put everything together in a newsletter, because it just makes it easier for you to look at. And I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. I'm scouring the markets to see what information is there and what can happen, and the key areas that should help you in your journey. On here, I just put some breaking news. Governments continue to reinforce industrial policy and supply chain security. That is just evident. You've just got to make sure that, what is a control? A control is goods that you're sending that might need some checks. So if it's things as simple as like, a laptop and things like that, always remember that they could come under controls or dual use, because if they're in the wrong hands, they can be used for other things. But nobody's saying you're doing anything like that. But what they're saying is to make sure you have a process in place that when you're dealing with your importer, you know exactly where that flow. And that's why having all your documents that if anything did happen down the line, that if there was a traceability, you'd have all the documents to prove that you did everything in your power to do everything correct. That's why it's so important to have your procedures in place. We said disruption, yeah, policy driven as much as market driven, requiring forward looking intelligence. Again, we do the intelligence, and that's why I've built the trade intelligence. So don't worry about that. But there's some things on updates, HMRC customs update, continuing the greater scrutiny on customs, I've just said. The checking, there's a real black hole there. There's a real hole. And, I can't remember how many customs diagnostics and supply chain audits I've done at businesses. And I would say it's messy. It's messy. Lots of customers don't have systems in place. They leave themselves wide open. They assume they're doing things right, and ultimately they could be hit with a huge fine. And it doesn't just happen to a small company; it happens with large companies. I've been involved with some big cases recently, and hoping to try and help the customers, but it's not always easy to do that. Department of Business and Trade Strategy are obviously throwing money, not throwing it in the right places as usual, but there's money out there. So again, it's finding it, push it into the places where the money's needed and the people who can support you. Simple. Don't just throw it willy-nilly and then nothing happens, and that's why nothing grows. So again, there needs to be more structure on that. DBT, again, continues to promote and export prep, getting yourself prepared and skills development compliance. Do your training. I mean, we do training. We work with Essex Chamber, Lincolnshire Chamber, and Halton Chamber. And we've got some live courses this year. So we're going to be doing some actually physical live courses. We did our first pilot one in November this year, beginning of November. God, it seems ages ago that. Doesn't it? It seems like Christmas was like a year ago, doesn't it? Seems to have passed them. But we did a live course. We had 26 delegates on that, and I was really shocked. I didn't think we'd get much people coming. They loved it. We had a whole day, and I really enjoyed because we could talk about, challenges, everybody had different challenges. We tried to resolve a lot of the challenges there, and everybody went away thinking, you know what, that was a really good course. But again, you can do it online. We are off call now for our level 4 diploma. So, there is a bit of knowledge in there, as they all say. Again, just have a look at your DEFRA. So DEFRA, if you're in the food and, the food industry, be aware there's lots of changes there. And again, keeping your notifications for DEFRA. We'll keep you updated with that. Again, it's interesting actually when you look at the stats, I always work on 2018 baseline because that was when the UK, we didn't have COVID or anything else. But we're seeing a lot of business starting to grow now, but certainly I would say in the service sector as opposed to the manufacturing sector, we need to get that growing again. And we need some support there from UK governments. Manufacturing accelerating outsourcing, nearshoring. So again, there's a bit of challenges there. That's more for the large companies. If you're a small business, again, look at your supply chain. Make sure your supply chain, particularly with things like CBAM, so carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe, yours might not come under that, but you need to be checking these things now. Europe have introduced the CBAM. Incredible how they've introduced it. Another I have my own feelings on it, and I won't announce it live on YouTube. But it's another way of just creating more challenges for an exporter, not just UK, but anybody exporting into the EU. They seem to have their own laws within the EU, and yes, we're trying to align more with it, but we have to be very careful how we align because it gets messy and it gets more paperwork, more other things that you think it's going to be easier, but actually it becomes harder. So again, it's just making sure we're that. World Customs, again, WTO, lots of challenges within the WTO. We'll start doing a lot more information on this because obviously it's early days in January, so the news will start coming out a lot bigger as it starts after the first week of January. But WTO, worth looking at. A nice website, lots of things on there. Again, the subsidiaries. I have been to the WTO. I did some training actually at the WTO for the council there 4 years ago. Great bunch of people, still more or less the same people there who I was doing the training with. So yeah, again, lots of information on the Chinese dispute. We're seeing Chinese dispute here. Initiates dispute regarding Canadian measures on steel. What does that mean when it says disputes consolation? It means that under the tariff trade quotas, that a particular country is not happy with certain things, and the WTO acts as like a governing body. So most countries in the world will be members of the WTO. Now, I know this is very difficult to understand when we think of what the US and what other countries are doing, but in general, the WTO are there to make sure that they resolve dispute settlements. So if a country is not particularly happy within a ruling, they will go to the WTO and say, we're not happy with this. We think this is actually affecting our industry. And we think all these goods entering into the UK as an import is actually affecting our own manufacturing. So there's a protection there. So the WTO would look at that and they may increase a dumping rate, or they may increase imposed tariff quotas, they may reduce that. There's lots of things you can do. So that's what the WTO, they're looking at, all across the globe. So they're not just obviously the UK, they're looking at every country around the world. They're under huge pressure with the US because obviously they've got a very strong character within the US who will not take no or yes. He will very dominant. But that's not normally how trade works. Normally, trade, if there's a dispute, you would normally go through the WTO. And the UK is a member of that. The UK will voice their opinions and what they think should be happening, or if there's anything that the UK is not happy with, we would go again to the WTO. So it's a good thing. And then, like I said, lots of different things, current news on here. China, we've got WTO members grant EU authorization to impose countermeasures against US olive disputes after meeting. So again, there's lots of things. So when your product suddenly gets an issue, and this is where you've got to be really clear, when you're exporting your goods, there could be a dispute going on within the WTO that the country that you exported into, there's a dispute there where there could be some changes. Now, if you're not aware of that and you're exporting into that country where you've been doing every month, I've been exporting Richard every month, no problems, but all of a sudden my goods are stuck. And it could be something to do with a dispute, or it could be something where it's been authorised or something's changed. So again, that's why it's so important to get your newsletter to keep up to date with everything, because it's an ever-changing market. So don't assume what you're exporting today to the country you're going into could be this. It could be different in a month's time. So again, it's keeping on top of that, and again, just making sure you're fully aware. Another one, there's a big event going on if you're into your AI. I was looking at this 2026 in February. If anybody's going like, if anybody is, please let me know and let me know what you thought of it. It's really interesting. I'd like to get any feedback that you could to tell me. I'll try and get some more information on this. I just found it today. I was scouring just to see what I thought would be interesting. I thought the WTO, World F, and normally thing. But again, remember, we're getting all that information for you. We're scouring that market to get all the data for you. So your newsletter will give you a lot of that information, what we think is relevant to a UK exporter or UK importer or anybody around the world. Doesn't matter really where you are. The challenge is what you here. Let me have a look, because normally what happens on here is when you're swapping and changing all the time, it doesn't change, which is really frustrating at times. And if it hasn't moved over, again, it's another lesson we've started. We'll try something different. And again, I just want to jump on here. Hope you've enjoyed that today. Again, if you can't see the information, I apologize. It's just when you're doing it on Zoom, Zoom's quite complex. It's not like, and I might do it on another. I'm going to watch this afterwards because everything's off the cuff for me. I don't practice anything. I don't need to practice anything. I've been delivering over 1,000 courses. I'm used to talking glass eye to sleep, as Mum used to say, bless her. I could never understand that. And then when I thought about it, I was like, oh, yeah, I get it now. It took me a bit of time. It was one of them Peter Kay thing moments, and it's like the light bulb in it. It's like, oh yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I never shuts, does it? And I'm going on and on and on. So yeah, so hopefully you've enjoyed today. Back tomorrow again. We might not be sharing them screens. If not, we'll use another platform because I use Zoom all the time, but Zoom is so complex to keep swapping around. And if it's worked, great, we'll carry on with Zoom. But I'll watch this back and see. But thanks very much. Hopefully, see you tomorrow. Enjoy the newsletter. If you've got any, please. I had some lovely messages actually. I had a nice message last night from somebody who said they feel the newsletter is really good, and I got a really nice newsletter in December actually from one of our competitors who said that the newsletter was really informative and really good. And then another one who I've known for a long time, who's very finicky. He'll pick up anything. If he says the newsletter's good, I know then it's doing what it should be doing because trust me, if there's anything on there that wasn't right, he'd be telling me straight away. He doesn't go around the bushes. He'll tell you straight away. Or be the bushes, should I say? He'll tell you straight away. So have a good day. Enjoy and hopefully you'll get some benefits from this as well. So thanks very much and have a good day.